Okay, now we're going to look at some characteristics that distinguished Native American societies from European societies most starkly.
We want to remember that at the turn of the 16th century, so the end of the 15th century, right when the Europeans showed up to the New World or the Americas, uh, the people living in the Western Hemisphere made up vastly dynamic societies, hundreds of societies and thousands of tribes that all were very distinct and very different in a number of ways. Uh, the people that lived in North America, so north of Central America here, the area that we call the United States today, they numbered the natives living there numbered anywhere from 5 to 10 million, while in the Western Hemisphere more broadly, the number of natives numbered between, anthropologists have estimated between 57 and 112 million. These millions of people lived in thousands of different ways. Some were matrilineal, others were patrilineal, some hunted, some farmed, some fished, uh, some gathered, or some combination of all of those. Some were egalitarian, some had stratified societies, some had powerful chiefs, others had councils of elders, some had religions focused on animals, others on nature. Uh, Generally speaking, these were full and vibrant civilizations. What we want to focus on next is some of the general distinctions that Europeans would find particularly jarring. We're going to be looking mostly at the differences between Europeans and North American Indians on the eastern seaboard, today what's the Atlantic coast states of the United States, because these were the natives that the British would first encounter. So, what were the major differences? One, a number of the natives in the area were matrilineal. That means they traced their ancestry through the mother's side. That was very different from a patrilineal society where the societies are very masculine, trace their ancestry through the father's side. Women had a lot of power in Native American societies, and in European society, women did not. And they were actually owned legally by their husbands. A woman's legal status was almost as property of her husband in medieval England. So that the Native American women had a lot of power was very strange. Native American women could even become sachems or religious leaders or leaders of their tribe in some cases. Sometimes leadership of a tribe was passed down hereditarily through the mother's side, and that was something Europeans had a problem with. Another problem that Europeans had understanding natives was the division of labor. In Native American societies, the men focused on hunting and the women focused on farming the corn and the squash and the beans and the complex. In European society, men did not hunt unless they were nobility and wealthy and had nothing better to do. You bought your meat at a butcher shop. Any land that was available to hunt on was probably owned by nobility. So hunting was a leisure activity to Europeans. So Europeans got to North America and they looked at the natives. They said, you make your women do the farm work, make them work all the time while your men go play hunting. That doesn't seem like a moral society. So the division of labor that natives had was very disturbing to Europeans. They conceived of the native division of labor as laziness, as the men forcing the women to do the work they should be doing. To Europeans, the men and women should be farming. Natives on the eastern seaboard were nomadic or semi nomadic. To Europeans, this meant that they were less civilized. A civilized person builds a house that lasts. a house that's very strong, a house that's sturdy. Indians, on the other hand, seem to build houses that are meant to be moved. This indicates a transient culture, a culture that's not connected to its place in a powerful way. Europeans felt the semi-nomadic or nomadic nature of Native Americans was indicative of their lower order of civilization. The method of farming. Europeans looked at the complex and they said, "What a mess. We don't want anything to do with that. Why don't you put your crops into rows? That would make much more sense. It's well ordered. It's clean. It's efficient, even though it wasn't efficient. It used the soil up very quickly, or the nutrients in the soil very quickly. But the Europeans did not respect native methods of farming, which was actually nutritious. To them, it looked unkempt, it looked unclean, it looked savage. Religion. Europeans worshipped one god. Natives worshipped nature. They worshipped the spirits in the trees, or in the animals, or in the bodies of water, or in the sun. That was something that was very disturbing to Europeans who looked at native religions as some kind of devil worship. Sexual mores. European societies had a very closed attitude toward sexuality. The men in the society controlled women's sexuality. The fathers decided who their daughters were going to marry. The fathers decided when they would have sex with their wives. The wives had very little say in any of that. And sexuality was something controlled. It was taught by the Catholic Church that sexuality was original sin and needed to be restrained. Native Americans didn't have those compulsions. Native Americans openly discussed sexuality. Native American adolescents were taught to explore their bodies. They were taught to engage in sexual activity at an early age in order to become comfortable with their bodies. On the eastern seaboard, the Native Americans had what we would call open marriages. If you were in a marriage in a native tribe and you were kind of tired of your wife for a little while, you go discuss switching wives or husbands with another couple in the tribe. And that arrangement might last for a week or a couple months. And it was something natives did on a regular basis. One method of hospitality was offering sexual activity that was seen as par for the course in native societies. So European men would show up, introduce themselves to native leaders, and the chief or the sachem would say, "Oh, you're welcome here. Here's a wigwam for you to stay in for the night, and my daughter will visit you later on." Now, the Europeans took full advantage of that behavior, but then they would go back and write about how these natives prostitute their children. Now, natives didn't look at it that way. Sex wasn't a big deal for them. They were open about it. They didn't feel their bodies needed to be strictly controlled by some outside entity or by another person. If it was consensual, it was fine. But Europeans did not look at it that way. There was more than consent involved in sexual activity. Ownership and economy. Natives had what was called usufruct ownership. They believed you owned land while you were using it. When you moved on, that land was open to someone else's use. So the natives conceived of ownership in a very different way than Europeans. Natives did not believe you could own land. Land was a gift from the spirits, from the gods. That was not something humans could own. Natives were also very giving of their possessions. They did not hoard possessions very much. They didn't carry many possessions all the time because you needed to be able to move your village quickly. So natives had a very different conception of what it meant to own a good or a piece of land. Uh, to them, ownership was not so important, and they revolved their economies around what was good for their tribe, not necessarily what was good for an individual within the tribe. So this collective mindset and lack of ownership uh, was very foreign and alien to Europeans, and Europeans had a hard time understanding that.